Good evening, everyone. It is a wonderful pleasure to be able to learn with you together on this incredible platform, this incredible opportunity here at YU Torah, here with Yeshiva University. I know all of us find ourselves in challenging circumstances, and it's really a tremendous privilege for me to be able to share some words of Torah and some words of hopefully inspiration with all of us as we prepare for our Pesach Seder. Many of us are in the process of recalibrating our Seder expectations. Now, for many of us, the Sedarim that we thought we would have, that we planned to have, that we considered that we would have, the Sedarim that we've always had, our traditional set of guests, our traditional momentum, our traditional energy, the traditional atmosphere that we have become so accustomed to, as Sedarim have so much sentimentality layered upon the individual practices and minhagim of different families, the traditions, all the idiosyncrasies. There are so many layers that comprise the Pesach Seder experience that for many, many, many homes this year will be a little bit different. And I thought that maybe we could together draw some inspiration and draw some strength from another unexpected Seder. A Seder that we encounter in the Haggadah, which also did not exactly go as planned. It's not a Seder that everybody months earlier said to themselves, this is who we're going to invite. This is the way we're going to orchestrate and choreograph the various Divrei Torah and the various singing and the children's engagement and all of the projects and all of the things that make up a traditional Seder experience. This is going to be a very different Seder. And the story really begins in the Haggadah itself. In answer to the Manishtana, we recite the following paragraph. Avadim hayinu lifaro b'Mitzrayim. We were slaves to Paro in Mitzrayim, and Hashem took us out, biyad chazako v'zro and netuya, v'ilu lo hotzi HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As Avosenu miMitzrayim, if Hashem didn't take us out from Mitzrayim, then we still today would have some dimension of our existence, whether it was the actual physical servitude, whether it was some of the mentality and mindset of Shibud Mitzrayim, but some dimension of Shibud Mitzrayim would have persisted and endured as part of the character of Am Yisrael. Va'afilu kulamu chachamim. And if you think that this is an exercise exclusively in educational and intellectual discovery, if you think this is an introduction to the concept of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, even if we're all Chachamim and we're all Nivonim and we're all Zekanim, we're wise and we're insightful and we're experienced, Kulanu Yodim es HaTorah, and we have a tremendous grasp on the depth and on the breadth of Torah, Mitzvah aleinu l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. We have a commandment on Seder night to engage in the recreation and the re-experience of the Exodus from Egypt. The chol hamarbe l'saper b'yetzias Mitzrayim. And anyone who's expansive in this regard, harei ze meshubach. And this is the clarion call of the Seder. This is setting the tone. This is setting the foundation that every single member of the Seder has a manner in which the Seder speaks to them. That even if this is something you've done 1,000,000 times, and even if this is something that you know everything there is to know about, there is something about the immersive experience of taking a night and reflecting and recreating the grandeur of redemption that our people experienced in Mitzrayim. And then we would expect, with that introduction, to initiate Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. We would expect that the very next line of the Haggadah itself should be, let's start the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Let's start telling the story. We all know that the story isn't told through the Psukim and Shmos. It's told through the recall that the Psukim have in the Bikurim. However, we're going to tell this story. Let's get going. Kulanu chachamim, kol hamarbe, harei ze meshubach. Let's start. Let's go. And yet that's not what happens in the Haggadah. The next thing that happens is we're told a story. What's the story? Maisa b'Rabbi Eliezer, v'Rabbi Yoshua, v'Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, v'Rabbi Akiva, v'Rabbi Tarfa. We have a story regarding these Tanoim, these great stages. Shehayu mesubin b'Bnei Brak, that they were reclining in the context of their Seder in the city of Bnei Brak. V'hayu misaprim b'Yetzias Mitzrayim, and they engaged in the process of relating the story of Yetzias Mitzrayim kol oso alayla, the entire night, ad shebo talmideim, until their students came, v'amru la'em, and they said to them, Rabboseinu, higiya zman kriya shema shel shachris. It's morning already. We have other mitzvos to perform. The kriya shema of shachris has come, and we have to go ahead and we have to move on from the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And this is our response. This is our response to the Manishtana. This is our response to the Avadim Hayinu. This story of these sages who shockingly got so involved and immersed in this mitzvah, they lost track of time. And it required other individuals to come and disrupt their Seder in order to bring them back to reality and allow them to move on with the mitzvahs that they had to observe next. This is how we begin the Haggadah. Everything up until now are the questions and setting the tone. This is how we begin the story. And the question is this part of the story? What is this? What is this? Who cares about the Seder in Bnei Brak? You don't think Tanoim had any other Sedarim over the course of Jewish history? You don't think that it ever happened that a rabbi became so immersed in speaking about something that he went on and on and on and on? It's such a chiddush. They had to come in. They had to disrupt them. All right, shkoyach, they had a Seder in Bnei Brak. Beautiful. I had Sedarim in Scottsdale, Arizona. Somebody else has Sedarim in Yerushalayim. Somebody else has Sedarim in Teaneck. Somebody else has Sedarim in Washington Heights. We don't need to hear about everybody's Seder. What is so special about this Seder? And that's what I'd like to discuss tonight. So the Ritva writes that this is actually a natural thematic progression from the previous paragraph. That the reason why the Haggadah introduces this Seder is because the previous clarion call for Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim articulated, Afilu kulanu chachamim, kulanu nivonim, kulanu yodim es haTorah. No matter how wise you are, you still have to be part of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And so the very next thing that happens in the Haggadah is we model that. We model that. We tell a story of great sages who didn't just read the Haggadah, they immersed themselves in Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim the entire night. Why is it so important to model that, to illustrate it? Because that's part and parcel of what the Haggadah is about. Part and parcel of what Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, this night of Pesach, is about, is not just to articulate and express the fundamentals of the formation of our people, but to model them ourselves, to model emunah, to model Mesorah, to model the power of questions. So here in the Haggadah itself, we begin with not just suggesting that this is how it should be, but we begin with an illustration. We begin with an example. This is how it should be. And look, this is an expression of what those ideals ultimately are. But there are two peculiarities regarding this Seder. One is the order that the Tanoim are presented in. We know that Rabbi Akiva is a Talmud of Rabbi Tarfon. And yet, asks the Imre Shefer, Rabbi Akiva is listed before Rabbi Tarfon. Rabbi Akiva seems to be propped up in some sort of leadership role that is not natural to the Mesorah disposition within which he would normally find himself. And the Imre Shefer writes there's a reason for this. The reason for this is that Rabbi Akiva is not just a member of this Seder, Rabbi Akiva is the host. The Seder is taking place in Bnei Brak, and who is the Rav? Who is the Mora de Asra of Bnei Brak? Rabbi Akiva. For those who've ever had the privilege of traveling to Bnei Brak, you know that what is the street that cuts through the entire city from beginning to end? The Rehov of Rabbi Akiva. He's leading the Seder, which leads to the second question. The second question, which is posed already by the Maritz Chayes and others, many others, and that is, okay, Rabbi Akiva is making a Seder in Bnei Brak. We understand. Rabbi Akiva is the Mora Da'asar of Bnei Brak. What are all of these other Tanoim doing in Rabbi Akiva's house for Pesach? In fact, Rabbi Eliezer, they all live in different places, and we know from the Gemara where exactly they live. Rabbi Eliezer himself lives in Lud, and Rabbi Eliezer himself in the Gemara in Sukkah is the author of this statement, Mishabeach ani es ha'atzlinan she'ein yotze mibateihem berekel, that I consider it a tremendous accolade, those who do not leave their homes for Yom Tov. Shenemar v'samachta ata uveisecha. Part of the simcha of Yontif is to immerse yourself with your family, to experience Yontif together with your family, not away from your family. So says Rabbi Eliezer, I want everyone to know, this is in the context of a different discussion, but he says, I want everyone to know that there is such godless of being home with your family for Pesach, for Sukkot, for Shavuos, for Yamim Tovim, to be together with your family, to grow together, to experience it together. And here, he himself finds himself at some rabbinic Pesach program in Bnei Brak, probably the only Pesach program that ever took place in Bnei Brak, but the original Pesach program. And here he is, he's sitting with Rabbi Akiva. And the question is, what are all these people doing there? What are all these Tanoim doing in Bnei Brak? So the Be'er Miriam, Rav Reuven Margolius explains that these Tanoim are in Bnei Brak for a very pragmatic reason. And that is, we know that our leaders, that our sages, did not only devote and dedicate themselves to the spiritual needs of the community, to the halachic needs of the community, but in all regards, the political needs, the physical needs of the community, they were the primary advocates on behalf of the Jewish people. And so these individuals, and there are sources in the Yerushalmi and in Tosas and other places, these individuals found themselves away from Eretz Yisrael, meeting with leadership of the Roman government to try to appeal and advocate on behalf of the Jewish people, on behalf of Am Yisrael. And they made their way back, trying to reach home for Pesach, but they only got so far as the port at Lud, and so the closest place they could find themselves is Bnei Brak, and so for purely pragmatic considerations, they find themselves sitting at the table of Rabbi Akiva. That's the farthest they could go. That's where they could get to. That's where they could be. They arrive in Eretz Yisrael. It's right before Pesach. They find themselves in Bnei Brak. So this Seder that we're reading of, our first Seder that we read in the Haggadah, the first Seder of Jewish history that's preserved and immortalized in the context of the Haggadah, is a Seder that was the outcome of pragmatic considerations, that was not planned and not scheduled and not the way they thought it would be, but it ultimately brought together some of the greatest minds of the generation, and it led to such a revolutionary experience of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. And Rav Soloveitchik explains that one of the purposes of this story is to bring into focus the value when you're researching, discussing the Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, when you're learning, that learning together with others, it sharpens your thinking, it challenges you, it makes you clearer, it helps develop the ideas in more profound ways. It creates an environment that fosters creativity. There's an enormous benefit to learning together with others. And so therefore, these Tanoim end up together in Bnei Brak for the Seder. This is not the Seder they imagined. This is not the Seder they planned. But they focus, and they ultimately are able to extrapolate such tremendous growth and tremendous impact from the experience of that Seder. Sometimes unanticipated Sedarim lead to incredible experiences. One of the things we have to do this year as we look around, and for many of us, our Sedarim might be a little bit different, is to open our mind and to open our heart to new experiences, to things not being the way we expected. We thought we'd land in Eretz Yisrael and make it back for Pesach. We got stuck in Bnei Brak. We thought we'd be with our parents, with our grandparents, with our friends, with our children. We thought we would be with who knows who. And here we're sitting at a Seder, just the nuclear family. We're sitting at a Seder, just a couple. Maybe we're even sitting at a Seder completely on our own. And there's a certain daunting dimension to that, everything's so unstable. This is not our Pesach. This is not how we recognize Pesach. First Seder of the Haggadah tells us that even Seders that we don't anticipate and we don't plan for, we can mine greatness from those experiences. Let go of what it was supposed to be and embrace the reality in front of us and nurture it and connect to it and develop it and connect to something within it that is greater than we can even anticipate and imagine. Let go of where we were supposed to be and embrace where we are completely with intentionality and focus and impact. And we'll be so surprised this Pesach. There'll be painful moments. There'll be challenging moments. There'll be difficult moments. But there'll also be moments where we can just get lost in the difference of the experience. And maybe it will pull out for many of us perspectives, ideas, thoughts, chidushim, ways of relating to Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim that we never, ever, ever considered. And maybe we'll get lost in it, and the night will take on a magic all of its own. And we'll be completely lost in all of the elevation and in all of the connection of what we're trying to ultimately accomplish. Till someone knocks at the door and says, hey, it's Man Kriyash Mashal Shachris. That's this approach. I'd like to share with you another approach. And that is the approach that we find in the Haggadah of the Aruch HaShulchan, Leil Shimurim. The Aruch HaShulchan asks this very question, V'im kein eza siba haisa, what reason could there possibly be? Kulam b'chag HaPesach eitzel Rabbi Akiva. Why are they all with Rabbi Akiva? And the Aruch HaShulchan makes a bold suggestion. And his suggestion is that there is a historical context here that is necessary to appreciate in order to understand why these Tanoim find themselves there. This is exactly the opposite explanation than the one we gave before. The one we gave before talks about a Seder that happened by accident. The Aruch HaShulchan says this was no accident. It wasn't a mistake that they ended up in Bnei Brak for Pesach. They got up, they violated even their own best advice, and they made their way to Bnei Brak, and they did it for a reason. Says the Aruch HaShulchan that this Seder is taking place at a critical moment in Jewish history. It's a moment when the Jewish people felt besieged and trapped and challenged. It's the aftermath of the Churban Bayis itself. And everything that was familiar about Pesach, to all of these Tanoim, to all of their families, to all of their students, to the entire Jewish people, everything that was familiar about Pesach had changed. There was no Aliyah L'Regel. There was no coalescing unity of the Jewish people coming from the four corners of the land. There was no sense of reconnection of Klal Yisrael like there always was. There was no going to shul and seeing everyone. There was no Korban Pesach. We were missing the central ritual expression of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the recreation of that moment that Klal Yisrael, as we will celebrate on Shabbos Haggadah, that Klal Yisrael transcends where they are and ultimately brings the Korban Pesach, the greatest symbol of Geula. And the expressive confidence of celebrating Geula in the context of Geula. The notion of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim being a story that is about something that happened a long time ago, that Hashem brought us from Sheba to Geula, and here we are, living with the Beis HaMikdash, living with a revealed presence of the Ribono Shel Olam. We have to appreciate what that means. We can't just go day after day to the Beis HaMikdash and offer karbanos. We can't just go day after day and encounter Nevi'im and be inspired and uplifted by their words. We have to know this is a story that started so long ago. This is a story of servitude. This is a story of challenge. This is a story of difficulty that ultimately we emerge emancipated and redeemed. We have to know that's what this story is, to tell the story from the disposition of Geula. And for the first time, this is such a different story. This is a story of Maschil B'Genus U'Mesayim B'Shvach, from the disposition of the Genus, from the disposition of the challenge, from the perspective of the Shibud. Now it's not slavery we have to imagine on Pesach night. It's redemption we have to imagine on Pesach night. It's a totally new reality. For many of his Tanoim, it was simply an overwhelming and overbearing mandate. How in the world would they be able to move past, to transcend the reality in front of them and connect to the hope that is so defining as part of the experience of Seder night? How could they possibly accomplish that? Says the Aruch HaShulchan, there is one man, one towering sage amongst them, who could pierce the melancholy of the impending new reality, the new normal. There is one leader whose compass of optimism and hope could transcend the reality that they currently face. There is one individual who can live life not defined by the circumstances of the moment, but by the aspirations of the future. And that is the great sage, Rabbi Akiva. And that is the Gemara that we are also familiar with in Maseches Makos, when the Tanoim ascend the Harabayas and they see the foxes that are roaming the desolation of the Makom HaMikdash, and they all begin to cry, and Rabbi Akiva begins to laugh. And they turn to Rabbi Akiva and they say, "Why are you laughing?" And he says to them, "Why are you crying?" They say to him, "Look at the fulfillment of the prophecies of destruction and desolation right before our eyes. Of course we're crying." Rabbi Akiva says, "That's exactly why I'm laughing. Because the same confidence we have by the fulfillment of the prophecies of destruction and doom is the source of our certitude that the prophecies of rebuilding and hope and redemption and salvation will ultimately come true as well." Rabbi Akiva, he doesn't just say that. They knew those psukim. They knew those nevuos. You know what was different about Rabbi Akiva? He had internalized this existentially. His emotional makeup was an expression of this disposition towards life. He could literally laugh at tragedy because he saw the tragedy for what it could be, not just for what it was. And so therefore, Rabbi Akiva is the perspective, Rabbi Akiva is the chizuk, Rabbi Akiva is the sage that we're going to spend Pesach with. And yes, they leave their homes, they leave their communities, and they gather around Rabbi Akiva to benefit from and internalize his sense of hope and optimism that it's going to be okay. That it's going to be okay. That even though we see destruction everywhere, even though there's no Aliyah L'Regel, even though there's no Korban Pesach, even though things are so challenging and so difficult, Hashem told us it's not going to end like this. It's going to lead somewhere. It's going to be okay. And that's the vision of Rabbi Akiva. That's the world of Rabbi Akiva. The ability to laugh, the ability to allow hope to be our most prominent guest at the Seder. The ability to allow ourselves to internalize that sense of optimism and that sense of perspective. And I have to tell you, we see that emerge in other places in the Haggadah as well. There's a machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Tarfon about how we end the bracha of Magid. It's a machlokas in Maseches Pesachim. And Rabbi Tarfon says, you just end the bracha, that's it. You say, what does he say? He says you recite Chosim B'Geula. He says, that's it. What do you say? Asher go'alnu v'go'alis avosenu mimitzrayim. V'lo haya chosim. That's it. You mention the Geula. And Rabbi Akiva says, no. You go on. Rabbi Akiva Amar, Kain Hashem Elokeinu. You don't stop with talking about the Geula of Mitzrayim. You bring that Geula of Mitzrayim into the contemporary reality within which you find yourself. Kain Hashem Elokeinu. So too, Hashem our God. V'elokei avosenu yagienu lemoadim l'regalim acherim. Habayim likrasenu. He will bring us to other Pesachs. He will bring us in and we end with Rabbi Akiva. We begin of ultimately bringing us to where we have to be. In fact, there are some Mefarshim that connect the song Dayenu, which is a song that asks us to appreciate the incremental value of each stage in Jewish history, even when we don't have everything we want. That song is juxtaposed to the Shita of Rabbi Akiva of how many miracles were at Yetzias Mitzrayim, because it is a continuity of the vision of Rabbi Akiva. And that's our Seder this year. We are all making a Seder in Bnei Brak. We are all inviting Rabbi Akiva to our Seder. We are all bringing ourselves to a space where we can laugh. We can laugh. We can be in quarantine and we can laugh. We're not laughing at what's happening. What's happening is terrifying and tragic. But we can internalize that sense of hope that gives us a perspective and a disposition that looks towards the future, a recognition that ultimately this world is leading somewhere. And on this Seder night, we're going to convene to internalize the values and ideals of our nation as Am Yisrael, as a Kadosh Baruch Hu's nation, so that we could ultimately lead the Jewish people forward to the ultimate Geula. Emir Tzashem b'mhei Rabbi Ameinu. Amen. Have a wonderful Yantif to everyone.